Okay, let's unpack this. I want you to mentally travel back in time with me.
Mm.
It's October 12th, 2009.
Mm-hmm.
Can you picture where you were? Because the mood of the world at that specific moment was, well, it was heavy, to put it mildly.
Heavy is a very polite way of putting it. I mean, we were barely a year past the collapse of Lehman Brothers.
Right.
The global financial crisis had just finished, tearing through the world economy like a hurricane. People were losing their homes. Their retirement funds were just evaporating.
Oh, absolutely.
And there was this palpable sense of anger and betrayal in the air.
Exactly. The trust was gone. I mean, for 30 years, we'd all been told that the markets were efficient, that they were self-correcting.
Right. The invisible hand had it all sorted.
That the smartest guys in the room, the ones with the incredibly complex mathematical models, had everything under control. And then just poof, it all melted down.
It really was a genuine crisis of faith. You had the entire free market dogma just collapsing on one side. But the alternative, I mean, these massive government bailouts, the state stepping in to save the very banks that caused the problem, that didn't feel like a victory to anyone either.
No, not at all. It felt like we were trapped between two completely broken options.
This ruthless crashing marmot or the clumsy, heavy-handed state.
You're either going to get run over by the market or smothered by the government. That was the choice.
And right in the middle of this huge global existential hangover, the Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences steps up to the microphone. They're about to announce the winner of the Nobel Memorial Prize in Economic Sciences.
And you have to understand, this is usually the Super Bowl for a very, very specific type of person.
Right. It's a coronation for the academic elite.
Totally. And the betting markets, and yes, of course economists bet on this stuff, were all favoring the usual suspects.
Someone from Chicago, maybe MIT.
Almost certainly a man, almost certainly someone who deals in high-level abstract mathematics. Someone who models the entire world as a series of equations. So the committee steps up. There's this global press conference. They clear their throat, and they read the name, Elinor Ostrom.
And the collective reaction from the economics world, it wasn't applause. It was just silence.
Followed by, I imagine, the sound of thousands of keyboards frantically Googling, who is Elinor Ostrom?
It was a genuine shock to the system. And not just because she was a woman, though. Let's be very, very clear.
Yeah, that was a huge deal in itself.
It was massive. She was the first woman to ever win the prize in its entire history. That was a headline on its own.
But the deeper shock, the one that really rattled the cages of the profession, was that she wasn't even technically an economist.
Right. She was a political scientist. Her Ph.D. wasn't in econ. She didn't teach at the London School of Economics or Harvard or Princeton.
No, she was at Indiana University.
Indiana University. And her work, it wasn't about interest rates or derivatives or stock market fluctuations. It was about farmers.
And irrigation ditches.
And
fisheries.
And police departments in the Midwest, things that mainstream economics just did not consider to be economics.
And that is exactly why this story is so incredible. By choosing her, especially in that moment, in 2009, the committee was making a radical statement. They were basically acknowledging that the dominant theories had failed.
They were. They were saying the emperor has no clothes. Elinor Ostrom Lynn, as everyone called her, had spent her entire life fundamentally dismantling the dogma that ruled economics.
She looked at the accepted wisdom that said humans are just selfish, rational egoists who will destroy everything they touch unless they're controlled.
And she said, actually, I have data that says otherwise.
She didn't just say it. She went out and proved it. She went out into the real world, muddy boots and all that, and watched how actual people behave when they have to share something.
And what she found gave us what we now call Ostrom's Law, which is one of the wittiest concepts we're going to discuss today. It's this idea that, reality is stranger and often a lot better than theory.
I love that. It's the ultimate underdog story of academia, isn't it?
It really is. You have this woman who was told she couldn't even study economics because of her high school math grades.
We'll get to that. It's an infuriating story.
And she comes back decades later to completely revolutionize the field and prove that the smartest guys in the room were looking at the world through a keyhole.
So the mission for this deep dive is pretty clear. We are going to explore how one woman took down the tragedy of the commons.
A theory that a lot of us just sort of accept as truth.
We're going to learn why your local homeowners association, as annoying as they can be, might actually be onto something deep and primal about human nature.
And we're going to unpack her 8 design principles, which are essentially the cheat codes for human cooperation.
And we're drawing from a huge stack of sources here. Extensive biographies, her seminal book Governing the Commons, and accounts of the legendary workshop she built at Indiana.
It's a fantastic story.
It is. But before she was a Nobel laureate, she was just a kid in Los Angeles. Now I read the bio and I see born in Los Angeles, grew up in Beverly Hills, and I immediately picture, the movie Clueless.
Right. Mansions, convertibles, ridiculous wealth.
Exactly. But that wasn't her life at all, was it?
Not even close. She was born Elinor Claire Awan in 1933. And while the zip code said Beverly Hills, her reality was post-Depression survival. She always described herself as a poor kid in a rich kid's school.
Her parents were artists, right, which sounds very romantic, but in the 1930s, that usually means financially unstable.
That's a good way to put it. Her mother was a musician, and her father was a set designer for the opera. But they separated when she was quite young. And this separation, it didn't just split her time between two houses, it really split her identity.
How so?
Well, she lived with her mother, who was Protestant, in a very, very modest house on the edge of the district. But then she spent her weekends with her father's family, who were Jewish.
Wow. That a fascinating duality to grow up with, especially in the 1930s and 40s.
It was, and she talked about this later in life. She said she never felt like she fully belonged in either world.
She was always the odd one out.
Exactly. At school, she was the poor kid among the children of movie stars. At home during the week, she was the Protestant girl. On the weekends, she was the Jewish daughter. She said this gave her an outsider's perspective from the very beginning.
She learned to observe systems?
She had to. She learned to watch how rules worked because she was always slightly on the margins of them. She wasn't an insider anywhere.
And she had to hustle. There's this detail in her biography that I just love. She swam competitively in high school, but it wasn't just for the glory of the sport.
No, it was entirely practical. She figured out that if she got her water safety instructor certification, she could teach swimming lessons.
And that paid well.
And teaching swimming paid real money. That money was her ticket to college. Her mother, didn't actually see the point of her going to university. Yeah, the prevailing attitude for a girl in her position at the time was, you graduate high school, you get a steady job as a secretary or something, you find a husband, end of story.
But she clearly had this engine in her, this intellectual hunger. She wanted to know how the world worked.
Oh, absolutely.
However, she hit a wall in high school that I think is maybe the most infuriating and revealing part of her entire story. We have to talk about the trigonometry incident.
This is the moment that nearly derailed her entire intellectual trajectory. It's just maddening. So set the scene.
Okay, so she's in high school, Beverly Hills High. She likes math. She's good at it. She wants to take trigonometry.
Which is a pretty standard prerequisite for any serious science or economics degree later on.
It's the gateway. So she goes to the administration and they look at her transcript. Now, her grades in algebra and geometry were good. They were fine, but they weren't, straight A's, top of the class.
And in the late 1940s, if you were a girl, good just wasn't good enough, was it? Not for something like advanced math. The policy, whether it was written down or just understood, was that girls were generally discouraged from taking it unless they were undeniable, off-the-charts geniuses.
So they just told her no.
They just said no. They gatekept her out of trigonometry? A simple administrative decision?
It makes my blood boil. Just some bureaucrat in an office saying, you don't need that. That's for the boys.
And the consequences of that one decision were massive. Because she didn't take trig in high school, she couldn't take calculus as an undergraduate at UCLA.
Right.
And because she didn't have calculus on her transcript, the door to the hard sciences and, crucially, to the entire field of mainstream economics was slammed shut in her face before she even started.
Let's think about the irony of that. The woman who would eventually win the Nobel Prize in economics was told she wasn't allowed to learn the basic math required to even enter the field.
It's staggering. It's an incredible story of institutional blindness. But, and this is where we really see her resilience, she didn't just give up on learning. She pivoted.
She joined the debate team.
She joined the debate team. And she credits debate as her real education.
Why debate? What did that give her that math didn't?
Debate forces you to look at public policy from all sides. If the topic is, say, should we build a dam on this river? You have to be ready to argue yes and no with equal conviction and with quality evidence.
You have to understand both arguments inside and out.
Exactly. It taught her that there is rarely one single right answer in human affairs. There are always trade-offs. There are always competing interests and values. It moved her thinking away from a kind of black and white mathematical logic and toward understanding the messy complexity of human rules and arguments.
It's training for looking at the gray areas, which is exactly where she ended up living her entire professional life.
It's the perfect training.
So she graduates high school in 1951. She gets herself to UCLA. She absolutely grinds through her BA in 3 years.
While working multiple jobs.
Right, working at a dime store, working at the library, teaching swimming lessons the whole time. She graduates with honors. And she thinks, okay, now I'm ready. I want to get a Ph.D. in economics.
She applies to UCLA's own economics Ph.D. program, and the ghost of the trigonometry incident comes right back to haunt her.
They look at the transcript.
We look at the transcript. No calculus, automatic rejection.
They didn't care about her honors degree, her reasoning skills, her work ethic. They just looked for the math credits, and she didn't have them.
That was the box you had to check, and she couldn't check it.
Oh.
So she literally walked down the hall to the political science department. And this is the great twist of fate in her story.
Because they saw something different.
They saw something different. Political science in the 1960s was, frankly, a bit more open-minded than economics. They were interested in institutions, how do governments actually work, how are rules made and enforced in the real world. They looked at her debate background, her incredible logic, her honors thesis, and they said, come on in.
It makes you wonder if she had been accepted into the economics program.
She might have been molded into just another model builder. She would have been trained to think in exactly the same way as the people she eventually disproved.
Being forced into political science gave her the freedom to look at the world differently.
It did. And she didn't just stay in the ivory tower after that either. Before starting her Ph.D., she got these jobs in the real world. She worked as an export clerk.
Learned shorthand, I read.
Right. And then she was an assistant personnel manager in a firm that had never hired a woman for anything other than secretarial work. She was constantly pushing boundaries.
And what did that teach her?
It taught her about the invisible rules of organizations. She saw how a hierarchy actually functions day to day, which is often very, very different from what the official organizational chart says.
The gap between theory and practice.
Exactly. That distinction between the rules on paper and the rules in use became the absolute central theme of all of her research.
So she gets her Ph.D. in 1965. And she enters the academic arena, right, as a very specific, very powerful theory is taking over the world. We need to introduce the villain of the story, or at least the intellectual antagonist.
Yes. The tragedy of the commons.
I feel like it's one of those phrases everyone has heard, but few people really know where it comes from or just how profoundly depressing it actually is.
It was popularized by a biologist named Garrett Hardin in a hugely influential 1968 article in the journal Science. The core concept is older, but Hardin's metaphor is what made it so incredibly sticky.
He asks us to imagine a pasture, right? The commons, it's open to everyone.
Exactly. So you're a herdsman. You have a cow grazing on this shared land.
Okay.
And you are a rational economic actor. In classic economics, that means you want to maximize your own personal profit. So you look at the pasture and you think to yourself, if I add one more cow to my herd, what happens?
Well, the benefit is obvious. I get a whole extra cow to sell at the market. The benefit to me is, 100% of that cow's value.
Exactly. You get all the milk, all the meat, all the profit. The benefit is entirely yours. That's a positive utility of +1 for you.
But there's a cost.
There is a cost.
Yeah.
Adding that extra cow puts a little more strain on the grass. The pasture gets a little bit more degraded, a little bit overgrazed. However, that cost is shared by everyone who uses the pasture.
So if there are, say, 100 herdsmen using the field.
You only suffer 1/100th of the damage. The cost is socialized, but the benefit is privatized.
So the math is a complete no-brainer. I get 100% of the gain, and I only take 1% of the cost. I would be an economic idiot not to add the extra cow.
Correct. And so would your neighbor, and the neighbor after that. Each person, acting perfectly rationally and in their own self-interest, adds another cow and another and another.
Until the pasture is a muddy wasteland and all the cows starve.
That's the tragedy. Hardin's famous line is, "Freedom in a commons brings ruin to all." He believed that human beings are locked into this remorseless system where we are compelled by our own selfishness to destroy the very resources we depend on. We are helpless captives of this logic.
It's such a bleak, deterministic view of humanity. It basically says, We can't have nice things because we'll just break them.
And the policy implications that flowed from this idea were absolutely massive. Because if you believe this tragedy is inevitable, like a law of physics.
Then you only have two choices to stop it.
Exactly. The binary choice. Solution A is what we call Leviathan.
The state.
Big government. The state. A central government comes in with an iron fist. It puts up fences, it hires police, it issues a limited number of permits, it regulates the pasture from the top down. If you add an extra cow without permission, you go to jail.
Okay, so that's one option. What's solution B?
Privatization, the market. You take the commons, you chop it up into a grid of little square parcels, and you give one to each herdsman as their private property.
And the logic there is that if I own my little plot of land, I won't overgraze it because I'm the only one who suffers the consequences.
Precisely. The costs are no longer socialized. If I ruin my land, it's my problem alone.
So for decades, this was the entire dogma. You either need big government to regulate us, or you need big markets to incentivize us. There was no third option.
None. And this wasn't just some abstract academic theory. This shaped Cold War policy. The West pushed privatization across the globe. The East pushed state control. But both sides fundamentally agreed that the commons, the idea of people just sharing stuff and figuring it out for themselves, was a primitive relic of the past, doomed to fail.
And then comes Elinor Ostrom. She looks at this elegant, perfect, mathematically sound model of the tragedy, and she asks a very simple but very dangerous question.
Is this actually true?
Does this actually happen?
She called this binary thinking the panacea trap. The idea that there is one magic pill, either the state or the market, for every single problem in the world. She was an empiricist at heart. She didn't care if the model was beautiful and elegant on paper. She wanted to know if it matched the data from the real world.
So she started doing detective work.
That's the perfect way to put it.
And let's talk about her first big case, the one that formed her entire Ph.D., the water wars of Los Angeles.
This was the subject of her dissertation, published in 1965. And it was the perfect real-world laboratory. In the 1950s, Southern California was booming. And in the area known as the West Basin.
This is what, near the coast?
Yeah, you've got cities like Inglewood, Manhattan Beach, El Segundo. You also have big industrial players like oil refineries, and you have farmers. And they are all pumping massive amounts of water from the same underground aquifer.
And they were pumping it dry, right? It was a classic commons problem.
It was a textbook tragedy of the commons in the making. They were pumping it so fast that the water level in the aquifer dropped below sea level.
Which means?
Salt water from the Pacific Ocean started seeping in, contaminating the fresh water. They were literally poisoning their own well. It was a slow-motion disaster.
Now, according to Garrett Hardin in the tragedy theory, these people should have just kept pumping until the water was completely gone and unusable.
Yeah.
They should have been trapped in their selfishness.
Exactly. Or they should have waited for the state of California to come in from Sacramento and take over the whole system, dictate who gets what.
But that's not what happened.
That is not what happened. Ostrom, through meticulous field work, observed that these people who were fierce competitors suing each other over water rights started talking to each other.
They communicated.
They formed a voluntary association. They started gathering their own data on water levels. They actually went to court, not to destroy each other, but to get a judge to ratify an agreement they had worked out amongst themselves.
So they created their own solution.
Yeah.
A solution that wasn't the state and it wasn't privatization.
It was something else entirely. They agreed to collectively limit their own pumping. They set up a water master, an official paid by them, to monitor usage. And get this, they voluntarily agreed to pay a tax on every gallon of water they pumped.
They taxed themselves. That does not sound like the behavior of selfish, rational egoists.
Not at all. And the money from that tax was used to buy imported water from the Colorado River to actively replenish the basin. They weren't just extracting, they were stewarding. They created what Ostrom called a polycentric system.
Okay, that's a key Ostrom word, polycentricity. It sounds like a geometry term. Break it down for us.
Poly just means many, and centric means centers. So instead of one big boss at the top, the state telling everyone what to do, you have many overlapping centers of decision-making.
So in this case?
You had the local water board, you had the city councils, you had the private water companies, you had the court system acting as a referee. They're all formally independent of each other, but they overlap and interact and negotiate.
To an economist who likes clean hierarchical charts, that probably sounds like an absolute mess.
It looks chaotic, and that was the mainstream criticism for years. It's too messy, it's redundant, you have too many cooks in the kitchen.
But Ostrom found the opposite.
She found that the messiness was actually a strength. It created resilience. If one part of the system failed, another part could step in. It allowed for experimentation. It allowed the rules to be tailored to the specific local geology and politics rather than a clumsy one-size-fits-all rule handed down from the state capital.
So she proves it works in LA with this incredibly detailed case study.
Hmm.
But her critics probably said, okay, sure, that works in California where people have lawyers and money and access to courts. But what about the rest of the world? What about poor farmers in developing countries?
And that was a very fair challenge, and it's the challenge that pushed her to go global. She realized she couldn't build a whole theory on just one case. She needed a massive data set of how people manage commons all over the planet.
So she and her colleagues at the workshop in Indiana started collecting case studies from, well, everywhere.
We're talking about high-altitude irrigation systems in Nepal, community-managed forests in Japan, mountain meadows in Switzerland that have been shared for centuries.
Fisheries in Turkey and Nova Scotia.
She became a global collector of common pool resources, and she found the same pattern over and over and over again.
Okay, let's unpack this a bit because this is amazing. She basically realized that Swiss villagers and Indonesian fishermen had figured out something that Nobel-winning economists hadn't.
That's exactly right. Take the Swiss village of Turbil. She wrote about them extensively. They have been managing their alpine grazing lands and forests communally since the year 1224.
Wait, say that again, 1224.
1224. That's nearly 800 years of successful, sustainable sharing.
If the tragedy of the commons was a universal law like gravity, those pastures should have been a desert centuries ago.
They should have been destroyed by the 1300s, but they weren't. And Ostrom asked why. How did they do it?
And what was the answer?
They had rules. Not rules imposed by the King of Switzerland, but rules they developed themselves. For the grazing lands, they had the wintering rule.
The wintry rule.
The rule was simple and brilliant. You can only send as many cows up to the shared alpine pasture in the summer as you can personally feed over the winter with hay that you grew yourself on your own private land.
Oh, that is genius. It naturally caps the total herd size. It links the use of the public commons to your private capacity.
Precisely. And it was enforced not by a policeman, but by the villagers themselves. They had a cow official, which is a real job title, who would count the herds going up the mountain. If you tried to cheat, you paid a hefty fine directly to the community.
So Ostrom looks at Turbil, she looks at the Japanese forests, she looks at the LA water basin, and she has this profound realization. Humans are not trapped. We are not helpless. We are capable of creating our own rules to govern ourselves.
Exactly. She moved the entire conversation from it's impossible to, okay, it's possible, but how does it work? What are the common ingredients for success?
And this leads us to the absolute core of her intellectual legacy. In 1990, she publishes her magnum opus, Governing the Commons. And in it, she lays out what she calls the 8 design principles.
This is the meat of the theory. And I just want to say, these aren't rigid laws. She's very clear about that. They're design principles that she observed over and over again in successful, long-enduring systems.
The toolkit.
It's a toolkit. And if you're listening to this and you run a team or you're part of a crypto DAO or you manage a community garden or you're just in a messy house with 3 roommates, get a pen. These are the 8 traits that successful groups share.
Let's walk through them. Principle number 1, clearly defined boundaries.
This sounds so obvious, but it's where most efforts fail. You need to know exactly who is allowed to use the resource and who is not. And you also need to know the physical boundaries of the resource itself. Is it this lake, or does it include the stream leading into it?
So a commons doesn't actually mean open to absolutely everyone.
No. That is a huge and persistent misconception. That's an open access free-for-all, which does lead to tragedy. A successful commons is a club. It has members, it has an inside and an outside.
You have to be able to say no to outsider.
You must be able to exclude people. If you let the entire world fish in your small lake, the lake will die. You need a fence, whether it's a physical fence or a legal one, like a membership list.
Okay, so exclusivity matters. Principle number 2, congruence with local conditions.
The rules you make have to match the reality on the ground. A rule that works for a slow-growing lobster fishery in Nova Scotia will destroy a fast-growing tilapia fishery in Indonesia.
So no copy-pasting.
No copy-pasting. The rule about when you can harvest or what tools you're allowed to use need to fit the local biology, the local culture, and the local labor market. This is the ultimate anti-bureaucrat principle.
You can't just have someone in the capital city writing one-size-fits-all laws for the entire country.
Exactly. Ostrom found again and again that top-down rules from a distant government usually fail because they ignore critical local knowledge. The farmers know the land better than the regulators do.
Which flows perfectly into principle number 3, collective choice arrangements.
This is basically democracy at the resource level. The people who have to live by the rules should have a say in making and modifying the rules.
Why is this so important?
It's all about buy-in. If some distant government agency sends me a letter that says I can't catch fish on Tuesdays anymore, I'm going to be annoyed and I'll probably try to cheat if I can get away with it.
You see it as an imposition.
Of course. But if I was in the community meeting where we all looked at the data and decided together to ban fishing on Tuesdays to let the young fish grow, I understand why. I own that rule. I helped make it. I'm much more likely to follow it and to make sure my neighbors follow it too.
It changes the dynamic from grudging compliance to active commitment, which leads to principle number 4, monitoring.
This is the big one. This is the enforcement question. How do you stop the free riders? In the Leviathan model, you hire a policeman. But policemen are expensive, they don't know the local context, and they can be bribed.
So what's Ostrom's solution?
Ostrom found that in successful commons, the monitors are the users themselves, or people who are directly accountable to the users.
The neighbor watching the neighbor.
Yes. It's mutual accountability. In the irrigation system she studied in the Philippines, the farmers literally take turns walking the canals to make sure no one is stealing water. Or sometimes the monitoring is built right into the system itself. If I take too much water upstream, your water pressure downstream drops, and you know immediately who to talk to.
But what happens when you catch someone cheating? That brings us to principle number 5, graduated sanctions.
This is pure psychological genius. If someone breaks a rule, you don't throw them in jail. You don't fine them $1 million on the first offense.
Because maybe it was an honest mistake.
Exactly. Maybe I forgot. Maybe my family was desperate. The first punishment is usually very low cost. It might just be a warning. Or a little bit of social shame. Hey, Bob, everyone saw you take too many fish yesterday. Cut it out. It's designed to preserve social peace.
But the sanctions are graduated.
They are graduated. If I do it again, the fine gets bigger. If I keep doing it, the community might suspend my fishing rights for a week. If I'm a persistent, unrepentant rule breaker, eventually they kick me out of the commons entirely. But the system is designed to correct behavior and reintegrate people, not just punish them.
Okay. Principle number 6, conflict resolution mechanisms.
People are going to fight. It's human nature. My cow wanders onto your land. I think you took too much water. You need a way to solve these arguments that is cheap, fast, and seen as legitimate by the community.
So now the Supreme Court.
Right. If every little dispute over a cow or a parking spot requires you to hire a lawyer and spend 3 years in court, the system will collapse under its own weight. You need a local council, a weekly meeting, a group of respected elders, some kind of local, accessible arena where you can go to get a quick, fair decision.
That makes sense. Principle number 7, minimal recognition of rights to organize.
This is about the relationship with the bigger government. The state doesn't have to run the commons, but it has to let it exist. The central government needs to recognize the right of the locals to make their own rules.
If the state comes in and says, your little local fishing association is illegal and your rules don't count,
you're doomed. The whole system fails. So the government has to respect the local autonomy, at least to a minimal degree.
And finally, principle number 8, nested enterprises.
This is for the really big, complex systems. You can't manage a massive river basin that crosses 5 states with a single town council meeting. It's too big, so you need layers of governance.
Like Russian dolls.
Exactly like Russian dolls. Small groups of farmers manage their local irrigation ditches. Those small groups send representatives to a regional canal board. Those regional boards send representatives to a basin-wide council. You build the governance from the bottom up.
It creates a system that's robust and can manage complexity.
And it's resilient. If one local group fails, the whole river doesn't collapse.
When you laid them all out like that, it seems so. I don't know, it seems like common sense. But it was revolutionary because it relied on trust, on face-to-face communication, and it treated people as active, intelligent problem solvers, not just passive resource users.
It was a paradigm shift.
Now, Ostrom didn't build this entire theory in a vacuum. We have to talk about her partner in crime.
Vincent Ostrom, her husband, her collaborator, and her chief intellectual sparring partner.
They met at UCLA, right, where she was a student?
Yes, in a postgraduate seminar on political theory. He was an associate professor, and he was 14 years older than her. They fell in love, married in 1963, and in 1965 they moved to Indiana University together, where they would spend the rest of their careers.
And their relationship wasn't just domestic. They coined a special phrase for their dynamic, didn't they?
They did. They called it love and contestation.
Love and contestation.
Yeah,
That
no.
sounds intense.
It was. They dedicated books to each other using that exact phrase. They genuinely believed that the highest form of respect you can show for someone's ideas is to challenge them, to argue with them, to push them. They would have these fierce, loud arguments about constitutional theory and federalism over the dinner table. They sharpened each other's minds like two knives.
And there's a personal aspect here that Lynn was very open about later in life. They made a conscious decision not to have children.
No, they didn't. And she said explicitly that this gave her a different kind of freedom. She wasn't worried about saving for college funds for kids. She wasn't worried about maximizing her salary to buy a bigger house.
And this allowed them to pour their personal resources, both their time and their money, into their work.
Into their intellectual children, and the greatest of those was the workshop.
The workshop in political theory and policy analysis, founded in 1973. And you have to pay attention to that name. It wasn't a center or an institute,
No, it was a workshop.
like a carpenter's shop or an artisan's studio.
The metaphor was absolutely deliberate. A workshop is a place where you make things, where you learn a craft by doing it. It wasn't a place where the great professor stood at a podium and lectured down to the students. It was a place where students and professors worked side by side on real problems.
And it was incredibly interdisciplinary, which was rare for the time.
Radical for its time. In most universities, even today, the economists don't talk to the sociologists, and the political scientists definitely don't talk to the ecologists. The departments are silos.
But at the workshop,
They were all in the same room. They realized you couldn't possibly understand a fishery just by looking at the economics. You needed to understand the biology of the fish, the ecology of the ocean, and the culture of the fishermen. You needed all the pieces.
and they did some fascinating experiments there to test their theories in a controlled setting.
Yes. They were pioneers in what's called experimental economics. They would bring students into a computer lab and simulate a commons. They'd say, okay, you all have access to this shared digital resource. You can harvest from it. How much do you want to take?
And what happened in those first experiments?
When the students were isolated in their cubicles, forbidden from talking to each other, they acted exactly like the tragedy of the commons predicted they would. They overharvested, they were greedy, they destroyed the resource in just a few rounds.
So the model held up in a vacuum.
In a social vacuum, yes.
Yeah.
But then they changed one variable.
They let them talk.
They let the students stand up and talk to each other for just a few minutes before the round started. No binding contracts, no police, just what they called cheap talk. They could make promises, they could strategize, they could look each other in the eye.
And the results just completely flipped.
Completely flipped. The cooperation rates skyrocketed. The sustainability of the resource went way up. On average, their collective returns doubled.
Just from talking.
It proved that humans are social animals. We use language, reputation, and the threat of social shame to build trust and enforce norms. The classic rational egoist model failed because it assumed we are all sociopaths living in silent bubbles. Ostrom proved that, actually, we are neighbors.
This brings us to the famous Ostrom's Law.
It's a bit of an academic inside joke, but it sums up her entire philosophy so perfectly.
What is it?
A resource arrangement that works in practice can work in theory.
I love that. It's the ultimate understated burn on ivory tower academics.
Hey, I know your fancy math says this is impossible, but these farmers have been doing it successfully for 300 years, so maybe, just maybe, your math is wrong.
It's a powerful assertion that reality is the ultimate authority, not the elegance of your model. And finally, in 2009, the ultimate authority in economics, the Nobel Committee, agreed with her.
She wins the prize. She shares it with another institutional economist, Oliver Williamson, and in true Ostrom fashion, she does something incredible with the prize money we're talking about. Roughly $1.4 million.
She donated her entire share to the workshop, every single cent.
That's incredible.
She wanted to ensure that the research would continue, that students from developing nations could get funding to come to Indiana and learn these methods. She wasn't building a personal fortune, she was building an intellectual lineage.
The prize was for the work, not for her.
Exactly.
But the end of her story comes tragically fast after that incredible peak. It does. In October 2011, just 2 years after winning the Nobel, she was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. It's a brutal, fast-moving diagnosis.
But she didn't retire. She didn't stop.
She refused to stop working. She told her friends she felt she had so much work left to do, so little time. She gave the prestigious Hayek Lecture, a major academic address, just 11 weeks before she died.
And there's this detail that is just...
Mm.
It's heartbreaking, but also so inspiring.
Yeah.
Right up to the very end.
On the day before she passed away, she was in her hospital bed, sending emails to her co-authors about papers they were working on.
She was checking the edits.
She was checking citations, making sure the arguments were tight. And on the very day she died, June 12, 2012, her final article, an essay called Green from the Glass Roots, was published online. She worked until her absolute last breath.
And what happened to Vincent?
Vincent died just 17 days later. He was 92 and also had cancer complications. It was as if they couldn't exist without each other. It was the end of an era for the workshop and for the entire field they helped create.
So let's zoom out. We've covered a lot of ground here. History, economics, water rights, Swiss cows. But we are recording this in 2026. Why does Elinor Ostrom still matter so much to the person listening to this right now?
Because the commons isn't just about grass and water and fish anymore. We are living in the age of the digital commons.
You're talking about the internet.
Think about it. Open source software like Linux, Creative Commons licensing, Wikipedia, the vast global repository of knowledge that is the web. This is a massive common pool resource.
And it suffers from the same kinds of threats as the old pasture.
Exactly. It suffers from pollution in the form of misinformation, spam, and online toxicity, and it suffers from overuse and congestion.
And we see the same old binary choice being argued today, don't we? Some people want the government to step in and regulate the internet like utility.
That's the Leviathan solution.
And other people want to put everything behind a paywall, privatize all the data.
The privatization solution. Ostrom's work offers the crucial third way for the digital age. Just look at Wikipedia. It is a classic Ostrom system.
Let's check the principles. Does it work? Number 1, clearly defined boundaries.
Yes. There are different user levels. There are editors and administrators with special rights. Not just anyone can go in and change the front page or delete a major article. There's a boundary between a casual reader and a trusted contributor.
Okay. Number 4, monitoring.
Constantly. The users monitor each other. If I go in and vandalize a page, a software bot or a human editor will likely spot it and fix it within seconds. It's a system of mutual surveillance for the common good.
Number 5, graduated sanctions.
Absolutely. First, you get a polite warning on your user talk page. Then maybe a temporary 24-hour ban. If you keep it up, you get a permanent ban. It fits the model perfectly.
So Wikipedia works not because of government force or a profit motive, but because of community governance.
It is one of the greatest examples of a large-scale self-governing commons in human history. It's Ostrom's principles in action.
That is a powerful reframing.
Yeah.
We aren't just scrolling through content. We are commoners grazing on the digital pasture. And we have a shared responsibility to keep it healthy.
And beyond the internet, of course, there is the biggest commons of all, the Earth's atmosphere. Climate change is the ultimate planet-sized tragedy of the commons.
And Ostrom had thoughts on this too, right before she died.
She did. She was very engaged in this. And she argued that waiting for a single, massive, top-down global treaty, a kind of a global Leviathan, is probably a mistake.
Why?
It's too slow, it's too easy for one country to veto it, and it's incredibly hard to monitor and enforce. She advocated for a polycentric approach to climate change.
Meaning what exactly? Many centers.
Meaning we need action at every single level, all at once, without waiting for permission from the top. Cities, states, individual corporations, neighborhood groups, international agreements. If your town decides to install solar panels on all municipal buildings, that matters. If your company voluntarily reduces its emissions, that matters.
You don't have to wait for the UN to solve it for you.
Right. If you build 1,000 small, local, and regional solutions, they start to stack up and create momentum. It's messier, but it's more resilient and much faster than waiting for one perfect global solution that may never come.
It's empowering. It puts the agency back in our hands. We don't have to just sit back and wait for a savior.
That is the core message of Elinor Ostrom's entire life and work. We are not helpless. We are not trapped by our own selfishness. We are capable of solving our own problems, of building our own institutions, and of working together to govern the resources we share.
So here is a final thought to leave you with. Ostrom showed again and again that communication, honest, often face-to-face communication, is the secret sauce that stops the tragedy. It builds trust. In an age where we are more digitally connected than ever, but perhaps less truly communicative than ever, An age where we hide behind avatars and shout at each other in comment sections. Are we losing that human superpower?
That is the billion-dollar question, isn't it? Are we building a digital commons that fosters trust and cooperation? Or are we accidentally designing a system that encourages the very tragedy Ostrom showed us how to avoid because we've forgotten how to actually talk to each other?
The tools are there. Her principles are there. It's up to us to use them.
Well said.
Thanks for diving deep with us today. This was fascinating.
Always a pleasure.